Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 2 of our 6-part Masters 25 full set review, where today we're going to look at all of the cards in blue, as well as a few multicolor cards at the end of the video. Now, if you saw part 1 on Friday, you kind of know what to expect here. This is a limited set review because all these cards are reprints. We kind of know what they do in constructed formats already, maybe with the exception of some of the cards that are entering Pauper for the first time. But because of that, we are going to discuss what you're going to be doing with these cards in draft and sealed in this particular format. Quickly before we get started though, just a really fast reminder, if you're looking for a way to support what we do here at the channel, just check out the description below. You'll find our Patreon page linked below. You'll find links to products on Amazon. If you make any purchases via that first link onto Amazon, we'll get a small percentage of whatever you pick up. And then finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers to save some cash, hopefully, and support the channel. Always goes a long way. So thank you to everybody, not only who looks at those links, but just for watching our videos. Always appreciate all of you. So with that being said, let's get into it for today. Before we begin looking at the cards individually, just a quick word about blue as a color, so you know what to expect from the interactions in this set. Blue, at its heart, just like blue originally was back in the old days, is all about control. You're going to see a lot of counter magic here, a lot of draw spells, a lot of instants, a lot of draw-go strategy. So if you like that type of gameplay, I know it's kind of a love it or hate it sort of thing sometimes. If you like that, you're going to really like what blue's doing in this set. So if you're in a draft, or sealed to some degree, although archetypes are more important in draft than they are in sealed, but they're important to know for sealed synergies as well. But if you are in a draft, what kind of archetypes can you think about playing if you're trying to get into blue? Well, we talked a lot about blue-white in the last video, so I won't dwell on that too much. Basically, it's Azorius Control, very classic control build. Now, another option you have, though, now that we're talking about blue today, is blue-black. Blue-black also feels very controlling. There's a lot of pinpoint removal in black, and of course, as I mentioned before, blue's going to have the counter magic and the draw spells to help you get to that and control the board state. But something else important that black adds to the equation is the fact that they do have a number of creatures. A lot of them have evasion like Fear or Menace, so that sometimes can be your win condition in these control builds. Blue-red's another direction you could go, and this time around it's not like a spells matter thing necessarily, although there's a few cards that fall into that type of gameplay in the set, but it's really more about control/burn, control/getting a lot of damage in with small creatures. So the idea is you have your controlling color blue, and then red is going to be a little more aggressive, and that's the color that's doing a lot of the damage. You have things like Lightning Bolt, which of course can clear the board for you as well if something slips by your blue defenses, but in a pinch they can also go to your opponent, and you can also put down some cheap creatures that may be able to put a lot of damage across if you're controlling the board through the rest of the game. That's kind of the idea there. Blue-green is actually an interesting combination because they have some potent combos. We'll talk about those as we go through the cards today and throughout the week. But they have a few potent combos in there that could just simply get you to the point where you're winning the game through a few cards comboing together. Also, too, they have a lot of token creation, which can work in similar ways that even blue-white and blue-red can. But even beyond that, they have a little bit of ramp in there, too. And some of the big creatures you might be able to ramp into for a win condition. Ramp decks are best when you have a lot of card draw backing them up, because one of the weaknesses of ramp is sometimes you have a nice ramp build going, but you draw all your mana creation or you're searching for lands, cards, and all of that, and you don't actually get to your win conditions, or vice versa. Well, if you can draw more cards and blue's going to allow you to do that, then you have a more consistent ramp game going on. So that's another direction you can go. Now, those are the archetypes we're going to be referring to as we talk about the cards today. So let's get started with Accumulated Knowledge. Accumulated Knowledge is a good draw spell. Even if you only have one, it's good. Now, there's some really great draw spells in this particular set, so if you only have one of these in a draft or sealed, maybe a lot of times it doesn't make your cut. But think of it this way. Worst case scenario, if you only have one, this thing is a 2 casting cost instant that replaces itself. So in a way, as long as you have the mana available at some point and you use it maybe at the end of your opponent's turn or something when you don't need to do anything else, it's kind of like having a 39 card deck, at least a percentage of the time, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It lets you hit your bigger stuff quicker. That's kind of the idea, right? So if that works for you, wonderful. If that's not good enough in your particular deck, then maybe you don't run it. Now, in multiples, this gets a lot better. And it is a common, of course, so you'd be able to maybe draft a few of these, or if you're lucky, get a couple in seal. Now 2, a lot better. 3, much better. And all of a sudden you can have some big plays with these later on in the game when you need to refresh your hand a little bit. So good card. Doesn't always make your cut maybe, but it's very solid. Also remember, it checks for copies in all graveyards. That includes the opponents. So if your opponent's playing this card, you can get some extra card draw off of theirs and vice versa though. So keep that in mind too. Arcane Denial. Alright, this is a very good counterspell, but there are some downsides to it you do want to be aware of. Some decks are going to like this better than other decks. Let's talk about the positives first. First off, this is a blue and 1. It's not a double blue spell, which means it is very splashable. If you're splashing blue, maybe in 3 colors, you're just not comfortable with like 2 blue for a counterspell. Secondly, you're going to get to draw a card on the next turn's upkeep, so this does replace itself. That's super sweet. Thirdly, it is a hard counter. Counter target spell, it's not conditional, you don't have to worry about just like countering creature or nothing else or something like that. I mean, it's giving you access to a true counter spell for only 1 blue in the casting cost. That's awesome. The downside is on the next turn's upkeep, your opponent's going to get to draw 2 cards. So you're giving them slight card advantage here. Now you're countering something of theirs which takes a card away, but you're losing a card. You're gaining 1 due to the cantrip, but they are drawing 2. So they're replacing what they lost and they're drawing an extra card. It's not a huge swing or anything like that, but it's a big enough swing in a powerful set that you might be concerned about it. So here's my calculus on this card. If I'm in a heavy blue deck and I can draft, or I have in my CL pool a number of the regular 2 blue counterspells, I'm just going to run those in lieu of this. If I'm splashing and I'm really, really in the market for a true counterspell, then I'm going to risk it and I'm going to run this, and I'm just going to kind of take my medicine and give my opponent an extra card. Sometimes it could be bad, sometimes it might be fine. But if you just need that counterspell, it's there for you. So know your deck pretty well. If you can use some of the more hard blue cards, then I would go with those. If not, then this is here. Bident of Thassa. This isn't going to fit into every deck for you, but it's very good in certain decks. And here's what you want to think about. If you're in a very strict control deck, a lot of counter magic, a lot of card draw spells, that type of thing, maybe not a lot of creatures, maybe your win condition is just 1 or 2 major creatures, then this isn't going to be really good. You're probably not going to run it because, yeah, you can kind of mess around with your opponent's attacks a little bit, but that's not really what this card's for as much as it's whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. That's what's really important here. Now, if you're in maybe an Azorius build where you have a lot of token creation going on, a lot of small creatures, all of a sudden this gets a little bit better. Or maybe even green. Green can create some small creatures too and get by with some random damage here and there. Then all of a sudden that damage turns into card draw for you, and then this card becomes a lot better. And if you're into a more aggressive build with lighter control elements, this card is fine at the 4 casting cost spot because you don't have to worry as much about holding back your mana all the time, right? If you're in a more dedicated control build, you don't necessarily want to play a lot of spells that are 2 blue and 2 that aren't doing anything on their own necessarily. You have to have other support around, in this case creatures. So some decks it's great, some decks it's really not good. Just depends on your setup. Blue Elemental Blast. This card is phenomenal. Now, it's a sideboard card, don't get me wrong. You probably don't main deck this because it does nothing unless your opponent's playing red. But if your opponent's playing red, just bring it in for game 2 and game 3, and you'll be really happy that you did. It's an incredible card against red. Blue Sun Zenith. Really, really good draw spell here because it's at instant speed. It's going to cost you a little bit, 3 blue, so you have to be pretty dedicated to blue. You want to at least probably be in a 50-50 blue build with another color, or maybe 60-40 blue might be okay. But once you start getting too low in blue, this might get difficult to cast. Make sure you can swing the casting cost, but if you can, run this card because it's going to be awesome for you. You just hold it back in a control deck, and when you don't need to use a counterspell and your opponent doesn't really do anything on their turn and your mana's up, just go ahead and play this, draw some cards, refresh your hands. It's going to be phenomenal. Then shuffle it in, maybe do it again later. Also, keep in mind that this targets the player, so you can use this on your opponent. There's times where the game could be going really long, or maybe your opponent's been greedy and been drawing a lot of cards. You might actually be able to deck them with this. Borrowing 100,000 Arrows. I always love the name of that card, but anyway... First time in Pauper, by the way, as it gets the push down to common for you Pauper fans out there. Now, in Limited, it's okay, but in this set, it's like not amazing. In other sets, this card probably would be incredible, but in this set, where there's so many incredible card draw spells, this one feels a little lackluster. It's at sorcery speed, it costs you 3, and beyond that, it's really dependent on what's going on with your opponent's side of the board. That does not feel great to me. If my opponent isn't running a lot of creatures or has a vigilance creature or something like that, then I could draw this and I could be behind and it's not going to do a whole lot for me. And that doesn't feel great at all. In a pinch, can you run it? It will be okay. Sure, of course, especially if your opponent is running a lot of creatures. Maybe you sideboard it in those cases. But beyond that, I probably wouldn't main deck this most of the time, honestly. Brainstorm. All right, this is a classic card. Very powerful and constructed. Maybe not quite as good and limited, so adjust your expectations a little bit, but there's still a lot of decks that will be happy to play this. And it's a common, so don't go overboard with these things. But having a one of in your deck sometimes is good. This gets better if you have shuffle effects. And there are some good shuffle effects in the set. There's some like tutors in green and such. So if you can shuffle your deck once or twice during the course of a game, then you're probably going to be more apt to play Brainstorm because you can shuffle away things that you don't need at the given time when you put them back on top of your library. This is also a good card against like Mesmeric Fiend and Black, for example, because if your opponent's going to cast that and try to look at your hand and take something, then you're able to kind of hide what you don't want them to take, or even like Vendilion Click or something like that, which of course is a mythic. But if your opponent plays one of those in like game one and this is sitting in your sideboard, you might want to think about bringing it in, for example. Now, even if you don't have these things that enhance Brainstorm going on, it's still a fine card. It's still very, very runnable. It helps you dig a little deeper, find what you're looking for slightly faster some of the time, even though at that point it doesn't really speed you along much after you get that initial card draw, because then you still have to go through 2 cards you've already seen, which isn't always a bad thing by any means, especially if you have a land-heavy hand or something like that. So, yeah, it's a good card. Maybe you don't always run it necessarily. It just depends on your build and also depends on what other cards you have in your pool, because there's some really powerful cards in this set. Brine Elemental. This could be a win condition for you. There's Morph, obviously, as a theme throughout this set, but blue has some interesting Morph cards. Also, Vesuvian Shapeshifter is in the set, and that does combo with Morph cards that have abilities when they turn face up. And this and the Shapeshifter can really lock out an opponent pretty effectively. So keep that in mind. But even if you don't have the Shapeshifter, still a very good card for you. 5/4 for 6 could actually just be a win condition type creature for you. But more importantly, you can morph this in early on as a 2/2 for 3, put some early pressure on your opponent as you control the board. Later on, use the morph ability, tie up their untap step, maybe, and keep their lands tapped for a turn or something like that, and start attacking it with this 5/4. A lot of value here. Very good for your blue control style decks, no matter what other color you're playing as your main color. Choking Tethers. This is really awesome because it's an instant. If you ever played with this card before, you know what I'm talking about here. Now, if your opponent has a lot of creatures like token creation or something, sometimes this could feel a little lackluster, but tapping 4 creatures is a big deal at instant speed at the end of their turn. And if you're behind, you can cycle it away, draw another card, and tap down a creature to maybe protect yourself at the beginning of combat or something like that. So it's versatile. If you're behind, it's good. If you're ahead, it could help you put a game away. Really strong card here. Definitely playable as a one-of in a lot of builds. Coral Helm Guide. This is better in some builds than others probably. If you're in the more classic control build like the Azorius or even Dimir control, where you're trying to control the board strictly and maybe win with like 1 creature or 2 creatures or something, then this isn't going to have a huge role for you necessarily in those type of decks. But if you're maybe in blue-green where you have a lot of creatures, some don't have evasion perhaps, and you need to get that damage across in a more like standard game of Magic, then yeah, this is going to be good for you. Its board presence early on is a 2/1 for 2, maybe even get some damage across early. Later in the game when you play this, that huge creature that can't get across for whatever reason is able to get their damage across, and maybe you shut down the game with this. So yeah, there are times this is going to be good for you, but again, know your build. It'll be better in some than others. Counterspell, I mentioned it earlier, but of course, 2 blue, counter target spell. It's here at common, and it's really good. So like I said before, as long as you're not just splashing blue or something, and you're in the market for a counterspell, this is going to be the counterspell, obviously, as you can see by the name. So yeah, play this. You're going to be happy that you did. It's just super economical. Many times, once you get to the point where you have like 5-6 mana on the battlefield, you can still do other plays, hold this back to ensure that your opponent can't do anything big on their turn. Attack in maybe with the creature you played for 3 mana, something along those lines. Classic control card. It's going to be awesome in so many builds. Court Hussar. This is okay. Like, I'm not crazy about this card. Is it nice to be able to play a card for 3, dig 3 deep into your deck, and take the best card out of those 3, and the others tuck them away? Yeah, sure. Probably a lot of the time it is. You're getting some good card selection. But there's so many powerful spells in this set. I don't know if that's enough. And even if I have white and I can keep the creature on the battlefield, is that good enough? A white, blue 2 with that ability and also a 1/3 vigilance? It's alright. It's definitely not bad, don't get me wrong. In probably most limited environments, I would say this card's amazing. But in this particular one, it just feels kind of middle of the road to me. I mean, there's times where you're just going to have better playables, I think. It's fine, like, don't feel bad if you have to play it by any means, but I do think there's better things in the set. Curiosity. This is an enchantment aura that's actually a very powerful one, though, because it only costs 1 blue, and if you play your cards right, no pun intended, you can actually get it to replace itself relatively quickly. So if you play this into open mana, you could get 2 for 1. That's not going to feel really good. However, if your opponent's tapped out or don't have cards in their hand, play this on a creature that you know is going to be able to get by that turn, and it already replaced itself, and that's super economical for just 1 blue. Fantastic card in those situations. Keep in mind, this activates on damage, not combat damage like the Biden, so that leads to some easier activations with certain creatures in the set, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now, there's some decks that probably won't run this. For example, again, if you're in a really strict control build, you're trying to control the board very tightly, you only have a couple creatures in your deck, then perhaps you skip this for another control card or a instant or sorcery card draw spell. Another thing you want to be cognizant of, though, there's a card in this set, Niv Mizzet, the Fire Mines, and guess what? This and Niv Mizzet is a 2-card combo that just wins you the game, basically. Now, that's going to be found at rare. This one, though, is at uncommon, so in a draft, you might be able to pull that together. If you're really lucky, sometimes your steel pool might have them both, and that's kind of crazy to think, right? So if you have Niv Mizzet, yeah, definitely run this, because even if there's a shot of you pulling that off, it's definitely worth being able to steal a game here and there, right? So that's kind of awesome. But yeah, Curiosity generally is a good one of in a lot of decks, but again, some decks might not want it. Just know your build again. Curse Catcher. This is very good if your opponent is running a number of instants and sorceries in their deck. Could be some of the blue cards like Counter Magic and Draw Spells, or maybe Red Burn or something like that. But if you find yourself getting hit with a lot of instants and sorceries over the course of the game, you probably want to sideboard this in. I don't know if I start off with it because there are going to be some more creature-centric decks, even though this is a set that has a lot of powerful instants and sorceries. It's still limited, and Draft and Sealed typically is a game of creatures, so I do think you're going to see more creatures than anything, even within this set. But if you find yourself in a situation where you think slowing down their instants and sorceries would be helpful, this is an uncommon. You may even have a couple of these. Go ahead and bring them in. Try to slow them down a little bit. Dragon's Eye Savants. This is another card that is now part of Pauper, first time in common. And it's a good control support card, actually, because you have to look at it this way. If you need a creature early on because the coast is clear and you want to put some early damage down, wonderful. For 3, you get a 2/2 creature. Fantastic. Later on, you can flip this card with the Morph ability, and now you have a 0/6 blocker, which could, again, draw out the game a little bit, especially if you stumble and something slips by that you couldn't counter. So you have a little bit of a backup there at some point in the game, and you also get to look at your opponent's hand, which lets you know if the coast is clear and what they have going on. So it does a lot. You know, it doesn't maybe make all builds, obviously. There's going to be some builds, again, that might be more focused on just keeping the board clear, something like that. But I do think this is a fine card to run, just generally in control. Exclude. Okay, this is a counterspell that only hits creatures. However, it does cantrip. It costs you a blue and 2. So again, no double blue here, which is good for splashes. And yeah, you know what? Sure, there's a lot of good instant sorceries, artifacts, and such in the set. But there's also a lot of great creatures, so you're always going to find something to do with an exclude. And the fact that it lets you replace itself is pretty amazing. So very, very good card for control purposes, or just even generally, maybe you have a deck that doesn't have enough removal and you want to splash some blue to use this and maybe something else. Then yeah, this can work kind of in lieu of creature removal some of the time for you. Although you do have to hold back your mana, of course. Beyond that, I have to say, I love the art and flavor text on this card. Terrifying, but thankfully temporary. That's awesome. Fathom Seer. This is another card that combos well with the Shapeshifter, which we're going to be looking at in a little bit. But aside from that, this is a fine card for you. I mean, returning 2 islands to your hand is a little bit of a tough pill to swallow when you're in control because you don't want to give up your lands necessarily. However, if you're losing resources later in the game and you need to draw cards, this will do it for you. So sometimes that'll be good. And also, it's another one of those cards that you can put down on turn 3 and have a 2/2 and just get in there and fight a little bit if the coast is clear. And then later on, you know you're going to turn into card draw when maybe you need to restock your hand a little bit. Or if you're behind, you might just need a 1/3 blocker against an aggressive deck or something like that on turn 2, and it works there too. So I love the versatility behind this card, basically. Flash. This is a powerful card, and it's got some new art that's really striking, by the way. But this card was banned in Legacy, It's restricted in Vintage. It combos really well with a card called Protean Hulk, which, oh yeah, by the way, is in the set. So this card can do some unfair things. It can also do some fair things that are very solid. Let's talk about the unfair things first, because that's a lot more fun. If you're not familiar with Protean Hulk, it's a green card. We'll see it in the green part of the set review, but it's a 6/6 creature. It costs 2 green and 5 to cast. But if you cheat it into play with this, when it dies, you can actually go into your library, pick out cards, creature cards, with the combined converted mana cost of up to 6, put them directly into play. So you can put a big creature in play or a bunch of smaller creatures if it dies. This card flashes it into play, and then if you don't pay the extra mana, you have to sack it, so it dies and you get the ability. Pretty awesome, huh? So that's why the combo is so powerful, even in constructed Magic. Now, if you want to play fair with the card, this is still a good combat trick. Your opponent attacks in, you flash in a creature, you pay the full price, and get a profitable block out of it. It's not going to be for every deck, but even if you don't have Protean Hulk, sometimes there is reason to play it. Freed from the Reel. This is an interesting card in the set because it has a lot of versatility. It combos well with other cards in green, which we'll talk about in just a second too. And there's a lot of different ways to look at this card. So for example, let's say I'm in a regular control build. My opponent plays a creature for whatever reason, I can't counter it, and I need to find an answer. Blue doesn't have a lot of answers. Now, granted, I'm probably not in mono blue. Hopefully, I'm playing black or white or something that has an answer. But for some reason, if I don't have a lot of those, then this is very playable. Throw down that creature, and even though it ties up one of my blue sources now going forward, I can keep tapping that creature down so that I can protect myself. Or later on, when I do have to get that damage across, I can tap it down so my opponent can protect themselves. What's nice about that type of strategy is you don't have to worry about a 2-for-1 from the aura in that case. Now, another way to play this, I could play it on my own creature. Maybe have a big green creature that I want to get across for damage and still have to be able to block. Then attack, untap it, wonderful. But I could get blown out with a 2-for-1 there. So, of course, be careful of your timing when you play something like that. Now for the unfair stuff. If you look at Presence of Gond in green, that's an enchantment aura that says when you tap the creature, you can create a 1/1 elf token. You can put both of the auras on a creature, tap it, get the token, pay a blue, untap it, rinse, wash, and repeat, make a bunch of tokens. There's even a couple cards we saw in the first part of the set review in white that have bonuses when creatures enter the battlefield, so you can exploit that a little bit if you happen to be in those 3 colors and that combo works itself out. Again, that's going to be hard to pull off. I wouldn't bank on that, but it's something that could happen potentially. Another combo you'll find in green, for example, is Utopia Sprawl Arbor Elf in this, which will give you unlimited mana. And again, we'll talk more about that when we get into green, but that unlimited mana can go towards Wildheart Invoker, which of course is a creature that will gain trample and get very large as you pump mana into it, and you just win that way. So there's some broken things you can do here if the cards kind of fall in the right way. So keep that in mind. But even if you're playing this card fair, there is a place for it in a lot of decks. Genju of the Falls. This is a good control card win condition because, yes, it's an enchantment aura, but when the island dies that you put it on, it goes back to your hand, which is kind of awesome. So you don't lose the card, which is phenomenal. It's very good for getting damage across, turning your islands into a 3/2 flyer. It has evasion, it's got decent power behind it, and this is how you kind of get that damage across. Because it's so cheap, it allows you to still hold back your counter magic and such. Ghost Ship. I actually love this card. This is one of my favorite old-time cards from the Dark. It doesn't look like much at first, but when you think about what control builds, especially like Azorius Dimir control builds, want to do, this card's actually really good because for 4 mana, granted, it's a big cost up front, and you do have to be pretty solid in blue, right? It's a 2 blue casting cost and then the regeneration if you want to use that as 3 blue. But once you get it on the battlefield, it really gums up not only the ground, but also the air, which is exactly what control decks want to do. And when the sky is clear, they can also get across with some damage, which is perfect for the evasion aspect. And you can regenerate on the fly if you need to. So if your opponent has some removal or something, it gets very difficult to get rid of this thing. Now, don't let your opponent bait you, though, into using that regeneration when you're trying to hold back counter magic. Sometimes you just have to let this card go. If they use some sort of spell that's going to destroy it, and then you use the regeneration ability, keep in mind, they probably know you have the mana open. There's a reason they're doing that. If they have a follow-up play that slips by that is what they really want to do, then you might not have another opportunity to get rid of that card, especially if you're in heavy blue. So keep that in mind. But overall, it's a very good card to run. You don't want necessarily 3 or 4 of these in your deck or anything. It is a common. You'll find a lot of them. But running 1, maybe even 2, can be good in a lot of builds. And also for pauper purposes, which is fun to say, This is kind of the first time it's available in Pauper, because this gets a little confusing because Pauper rules can be confusing, but this was originally printed as a common in the dark. However, if you look at Magic Online, it never got a common printing because it was printed at Time Spiral at the specialty rarity, the time-shifted rarity. So it technically was not legal in Magic Online Pauper, and usually tournament organizers use the Magic Online rules for Pauper games, even in paper, which means that for the first time, unless you use different rules, of course, this is available to you in Pauper. So there you go. Horseshoe Crab. Okay, this card actually has the untap built right into it, so this can combo with things like Presence of Gods on its own without having to worry about the enchantment we saw a few moments ago. So that's actually kind of sweet. And if you're not doing something like that combo, do you still play this? Maybe. It just depends on your build. It's a nice little blocker for 3. Kind of gums up the ground a little bit. I might not main deck this, though. If I'm up against a more aggressive deck, I could bring it in, so that way I have a 1/3 blocker by turn 3 or 4, though. Jace the Mind Sculptor. Yeah, this guy's okay. One of the most powerful cards ever printed in Magic. And yeah, if you get Jace, play Jace. And it's kind of funny because a lot of times when I do these reviews, I'll say things like, when you're building your deck and limited, don't get drawn in by one powerful card, especially if it's 2 on color and your other cards in that color aren't good. Then go for the colors of the better synergy and ignore the powerful card. Yada, yada, yada. Throw all that out the window when it comes to this card. If you got Jace, play Jace. Find a way. Find a way. It will be worth it. This card single-handedly will help you win games. It's just incredible. The versatility is what's great about the card, just generally. I don't need to tell you this probably. Most people are very familiar with this card at this point, but for 4 mana, you get yourself a Planeswalker with repeatable abilities that are very powerful that can use many of these abilities right when it enters the battlefield. I mean, +2 to do the Fate Seal option. This helps you dig for something you need in your library or keep your opponent off something you don't want them to have in theirs. The Brainstorm for 0 is awesome. The -1 to bounce a creature is awesome. And yeah, even the ultimate can win you the game. Although if you get there, you probably were already winning the game, quite honestly. The card is super amazing. Play it all day long. Every build just doesn't matter. Jalira Master Polymorphist. This card's okay, but what's almost a deal breaker for me is the fact that it can only dig for non-legendary creatures. Like, I would have loved to use this to pull like an Akroma or a Nicol Bolas or something like that, because I do think that could be an interesting way to cheat something into play, and actually harder than, say, Elvish Piper, in all honesty. So I don't feel like that would have been too much to ask necessarily, but obviously this card was designed for a core set a while back, so it wasn't going to be that powerful, and that's just the nature of it. Now, where do you use this thing? Maybe if I'm in Simic colors and I know I'm going to have some sizable creatures and some tokens to sacrifice, that's probably where you're going to get the most bang for your buck here. Because if you're just willy-nilly sacrificing your creatures trying to hit other creatures, that's just too high variance. But if you sacrifice a token here and there, you know you're going to probably hit something that's better than the token, I would hope, anyway, right? So if I do have green token generation, some green creatures that I could luck into something, I might go for it and just try it out. White might be a good complement to this too, or perhaps you splash this in a Selesnya deck. That might be one way to go as well. It's worthy to note too that this card interacts very well with Brainstorm, so it's got that going for it. But at the end of the day, it does feel a little bit niche to me, and I probably would only play it in the exact circumstance I just described. Mana War at common, fantastic card. Play these when you can, because there is such a huge tempo play behind this. Let's say you are playing control builds of any kind, really, and your opponent plays a creature. You have counter magic, but maybe you decide you're not going to use it. You're going to save it for something else or save it for later in the game, because you can later on just bounce their creature back with this. Play it, bounce the creature, and then you have a 2/2 on the board and maybe hold back your counter magic to counter the creature when it tries to come back or counter something that's more important to you. So that kind of versatility and pressure on the board for just 3 mana, it's a very, very good card. Merfolk Looter, another really strong card. One of the biggest mistakes I see from newer players is they'll sit down at the table and their opponent will play something like this, a Merfolk Looter. It's a 1/1 for 2. They don't use the removal spell on it. They just figure, I'm going to save it for the big creature, or I'm going to save it for whatever they loot into and try to play. But you know what? Just the sheer card advantage that occurs over time by pitching the extra lands that you don't need and just drawing more cards, this is just too overwhelming to defeat if it comes out early in the game. So you need to deal with these things quickly. And on the flip side of the coin, yeah, these are good. Play them, because if you're in blue, Even if you're splashing blue, I'd try to run this. Murder of Crows. Good control card here is a win condition. It's a sizable creature. Blue doesn't have that many sizable creatures in the set, so this is definitely good to run, and it has evasion, and it can lead to some looting as well, which is perfect. Really good card to run, maybe a 1 of, sometimes 2 of. Mystic of the Hidden Way, another good control win condition type creature because it can't be blocked, so you can force that damage across. Also, too, it does cost 5, however, with the morph, you can kind of pay for it in installments of 3. So pay 3, get a 2/2, and then when you want to transform it for 3 to the 3/2 creature that can't be blocked, then wonderful, you can hold back your mana for counter magic and such. Good card in those cases. And even if you're not playing that style of game, unblockable creatures can just sometimes just be really good no matter what. Pact of Negation. Okay, this set doesn't have Force of Will, but it's got this. Really good card. This does give you the opportunity to maybe at one time tap out and still hold back counter magic. Be careful, though, of that clause at the beginning of your next upkeep. Pay 2 blue and 3. If you don't, you lose the game. Don't forget that. That'd be embarrassing. And secondly, also, too, be advised there's a lot of land destruction in this particular set. So if you have like 5 mana exactly and your opponent has land destruction after you play this, you might not be having a very good day. So just keep that in mind. Like if you're casting something and your opponent has more land available and they're in colors that have land destruction, that could backfire, so just keep that in mind. You don't want them to pull out an Armageddon or something after that, or a Pillage and get rid of one of your islands when you only have 2 islands or something along those lines. So yeah, there's a little risk behind this card, but I think the reward is high enough. You just have to be thoughtful about when you play it. Phantasmal Bear. These are actually good because they're 1-drop 2/2s. Yes, they're super fragile, and yes, they could be taken out relatively quickly sometimes. But you can get some damage across in the meantime with these things, which means that later on when you play like that unblockable 3/2 or something, you have less damage to get there and finally win the game. So these are actually good for early turn plays in blue, really no matter what type of deck you're playing, honestly. In some ways, they're good in more aggressive builds too, like red-blue, which red does have more aggressive elements tied into it. Reef Worm. This is a solid rare, actually. 4 for a 0/1. That doesn't sound good, but when it dies, it becomes a 3/3. Basically, you get a 3/3 token. When that dies, you get a 6/6 token. When that dies, you get a 9/9. So it creates this chain that eventually leads to some really hard to deal with creatures. However, the downside is they are token creatures. So not only can they be destroyed through conventional methods, but they can also be bounced. And if they're bounced, that's a bad deal because if they're bounced, they're not dying. So keep that in mind. So if they die, though, you're having a good day. Now, the other downside to think about with this card is, at least some of the time, your opponent's going to have some control whether you can actually start this chain or not. For example, maybe they have like a 3/3 creature that you could simply chump block and get a 3/3 of your own. They probably won't do that, right? Because they know that's where you want to be if they don't want you to do it anyway. Now, if they have a bounce spell, they might do it. Now, giving them that kind of control over this card weakens it a little bit. With that being said, there's ways to get around that, especially if you're in blue-black. So this is a card on its own, slows down the game, good for just general control, but once you're talking blue-black, then it becomes even maybe more of an aggressive card, because there are cards in black where you can sacrifice your own creatures for a benefit. If you do that, you sacrifice this to get the next size up, sacrifice the 3/3 for the 6/6, so on and so forth. Now, like I said, you got the drawback that those tokens can be fragile sometimes, but that can be true of any creature, especially in such a powerful set, so I think it's worth trying, especially in a blue-black deck. Retraction Helix. This is a bounce spell. It actually bounces target non-land permanent, which is always awesome. However, you have to have a creature for this to work, and you have to be able to tap that creature. That's a little awkward, and a lot of decks might not want that just because of those requirements. Again, classic control builds, you might avoid this because you might not have that many creatures in the deck, so that could be an issue for you. If you have enough creatures, though, maybe you're in Azorius, but you have a lot of token generation, or Simic, which has a lot of creatures, or Boros has a lot of creatures, then that's a little different. It could be a very runnable card for you, but again, know your deck. Shoreline Ranger. With that new art, looks awesome. I love these island cycling, plane cycling, these land cycling cards that you see in the set. First off, they are a shuffle effect, which works great with Brainstorm, so you got that going for you. Secondly, this is a fine win condition style creature as long as you can get it on the battlefield. It's a 3/4 flyer, it's got evasion, that's nice. A little expensive though. But what you're getting out of this is the ability to be able to cycle this away for an island when you need to, which means it really smooths out a lot of your opening hands. Sometimes you see this in your opening hand and it actually makes the difference between what would have been a mulligan to what is now keep. And that's actually pretty awesome. So I love running cards like this just for that reason. Granted, with that high casting cost, you don't want to go overboard, but one, maybe even sometimes two of this is acceptable for sure and can be good. Sift. Sift is an awesome draw spell. It is sorcery speed though, so keep that in mind in this particular set, but drawing 3 cards and then discarding 1, you're still going to see a lot of cards, and many times that discard could be inconsequential. You have a lot of extra lands or something like that, or cards you can't use at this point in the game. Or, if you want to get really crazy, you can use that discard to your advantage. So let's talk about black again. For example, if you're in the blue-black deck, there's cards like Zombify. There's cards like Hell's Caretaker. And they can take a creature from your graveyard, put it back into play. Maybe you discarded, I don't know, Nicol Bolas, one of the 2 Achromas, something crazy like that. And you cheated into play. That'd be kind of awesome, right? Yeah, and this is at common, so you'll be able to find some of these if you try to draft that kind of deck. Totally Lost. Good control card. A little expensive at 5, but it's at instant speed, so that's a good thing. So you can hold back a little bit, wait till your opponent ends the turn, and you don't have anything better to do. You can use this as a big tempo play to take them off their next card draw and have them draw something that's inconsequential and make them replay it. That's kind of awesome. So you don't want to go overboard with these in a deck necessarily, again, because of that casting cost, but maybe like a 1-of is very good in a lot of control builds, or just generally in blue, no matter what you're doing, honestly. Twisted Image. I don't know. It doesn't feel great in this particular set for what blue's trying to do. It's only 1 blue, instant speed, cantrip, so I do love that. I mean, replacing itself goes a long way with me. But I don't know if you're going to find a lot of opportunities to use this ability, honestly. I mean, yeah, there are some blue creatures with higher toughness. Once in a while, you might get a gotcha moment on your opponent, good combat trick type thing. But I don't know if you're going to run this over a lot of the other cards in this set. This is a very powerful set. There are times where it will make sense, I'm sure, but a lot of the times I think this starts out in your sideboard. Vendilion Click. This card's amazing. Of course, it's a mythic. You won't see it all the time, but this does so much for you. First off, flash ability. You can surprise your opponent, and more importantly, hold back your counter magic, play it at the right time at the end of your opponent's turn when you can get away with it. That's one way to look at this. Once it's on the battlefield, awesome potential win condition. Piling up 3, 3, 3 every turn starts to add up really fast, puts pressure on your opponent. And beyond that, there's other tricky things you can do with this card, because when it enters the battlefield, you get to look at target player's hand, and if you choose to, you don't have to, may choose a non-land card from that hand, have them put it on bottom of their library, and draw a new card. So you can look at that a couple of ways. You can do that to yourself if you just want to draw another card and perhaps get rid of something you don't need at the moment. You could look at your opponent's hand, see if the coast is clear, and perhaps get rid of something that's problematic in their hand for another random card. And then finally, another way to look at this is maybe instead of playing this at the end of my opponent's turn, maybe I play it on their draw step. So I get that extra card, I get a peek at what they just drew, and maybe stop that before they even get a chance to play it. That could be kind of amazing at times too. So much versatility, just a phenomenal, phenomenal card. Vesuvian Shapeshifter. So I mentioned this earlier, it does combo with some of the morph cards that we've seen, like the Brine Elemental. Basically the way it works is because when you turn this face up, you are turning it into another creature, and it's happening as you're turning the card face up, which means an ability that says when you turn this card face up, XYZ happens, then that will happen. So in the case of Brine Elemental, you'll get to take your opponent off their untap step. You basically kind of lock them down, which is crazy. Or it works with like Fathom Seer to draw cards, stuff like that. So this combos really well with some other morph cards. But even on its own, it's a good card because it can copy the best thing on the battlefield, basically, which is kind of awesome. Remember, when you morph it, though, you don't get enters the battlefield effects, but still, it doesn't matter. I think the card is just good enough. At 5, some control decks might be a little weary, especially if you're not playing a lot of creatures on your own other than this one, because if there's not any other targets, then you just have a 2-2, which, okay, maybe that's good enough and still playable in a pinch, but you might find better things some of the time. But if you have synergies like the ones I mentioned, then yeah, run this. You could luck into some good situations. Willbender, this is a fine card. It's got morph, it's got a deflection built in. If you play it face down for 3, now you get yourself a 2-2. You can get some early damage in. When the time's right, deflect something, which can be good in this set because there's a lot of good cards that target one thing, like Lightning Bolt and such. So you can really surprise your opponent sometimes with this. And if you're behind, you just need a blocker, like a 1-2 or a chump blocker. Yeah, for 2, you got that as well. So yeah, very, very runnable card. Excellent for control purposes, but also good in just really any deck. Notion Thief as we move into some multicolored cards. So we're going to look at Dimir first, and Notion Thief is a fantastic sideboard card. Now, first off, it's good in control just generally because it has flash. Now, a 3/1 is a little fragile and it doesn't have evasion, so that's awkward. You might have better things, but the fact that you can still kind of keep your mana open and play it at the end of your opponent's turn is really good. But here's what you want to do with this card. There are a lot of card draw spells. We saw a bunch of them today, right? And this really messes up those card draw spells. Now, let's say your opponent casts a Brainstorm. They draw 3 cards normally and put 2 on top, but if Notion Thief gets flashed into play as a response, now you draw 3 cards and they still have to put 2 cards on top of their library. That is backbreaking. Or if they happen to have Jace and they use the 0 ability on Jace, same thing. Or if they just use a regular draw spell, I mean, you can reap the benefit of that as well. So this is actually a really fine card. Again, like I said, maybe you don't always main deck this, considering it is 4 casting costs, blue and black. So it's not the easiest thing to cast. Even though it does have flash, it's still really fragile as a 3/1. So maybe not great in all matchups. But as soon as you see your opponent playing blue, for example, yeah, I'm going to bring this thing in because you could have a big, big turn. Shadow Mage Infiltrator, good old Johnny Magic back again. He's hiding under that hood, though. We can't see his face. But 1/3 with Fear, with Curiosity built in for 3. Fantastic card. Does everything blue wants to do. Now, granted, this isn't about getting damage across, although it does have Fear. This is more about drawing cards. And if your opponent can't block this thing, you're going to be having a pretty good day. Also, to remember, black has a lot of Fear creatures, which many times can be a good complement to control because they could be your win condition due to their evasion. So that's kind of awesome, and this card complements that a little bit as well, and also gives you the card draw. Niv Mizzet the Firemind as we move into some Izzet colors. Now, I mentioned earlier the combo with this and Curiosity. That's pretty amazing. The worst thing about this card is just the casting cost because, yeah, it's kind of hard to swing sometimes in limited 2 red, 2 blue, and 2. But it's not that bad. If you're in like a 50-50-ish as a deck or something, you'll be really happy to play this. And this card is powerful. I mean, it's a 4/4 flyer, and you can tap it to draw a card. Oh, and by the way, whenever you draw a card, you get to do 1 damage to target creature or player. And blue has tons of card draw opportunities, as we've seen. Red even has a few. So you could be drawing some cards, doing damage with this, and have a sizable flyer on the board. That in itself could be a win condition for you. Quicksilver Dagger. Here's another card that sometimes can be like a win condition. It's an enchantment aura. Again, throw this on something that can untap, whether you use the enchantment we saw earlier or you just throw it out like a horseshoe crab. Play this, tap, draw a card, deal 1 damage to player, pay a blue, untap, do it again. As much blue mana as you have, you can do this repeatedly, draw a bunch of cards. If you have Niv Mizzet on the battlefield, well, even better. Or else there's also Lorescale Coddle, which is green and blue, so it does bring in another color to the equation. But that gets larger as you draw a card, so that could be something you do too. We'll see that card later in the week, but this is a very powerful card. Again, it's an enchantment aura. If you play it at the wrong time, you could get blown out a little bit, but just know the right time to play it, and it can be very, very powerful for you. Nicol Bolas. All right, the original Nicol Bolas back with that from the Vault art. Looks pretty amazing. The trickiest part of Nicol Bolas is getting out on the battlefield, right? I mean, that casting cost is pretty tough. 2 black, 2 blue, 2 red, and 2. It's going to take you a little while to build up to that. And what's awkward is green could help you do that, but there's no green in the casting cost. There are some artifacts that could help you, sure, but this is going to be really, really hard, if not impossible to hard cast, quite honestly. So you have to be careful, considering I think this is going to be a relatively quick format with a lot of answers, so you don't want to necessarily put all your eggs in one basket by trying to cast something like this and then it just gets counterspelled or something or destroyed. So really, what do you want to do with this thing? You want to cheat it into play, and there's ways to do that, obviously. Black is part of the casting cost. Zombify would be a good way to go. Hell's Caretaker, another good way to go. Even if you happen to be in green as well, because you don't necessarily have to be playing these colors to cheat this thing into play. You could have this in a green deck and have Elvish Piper, for example. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Be creative, get this into play, but do remember that upkeep cost, because again, that could be embarrassing. Our last card, Animar, Soul of Elements. Okay, Commander players, you know how good this can be. This card's phenomenal. Not too hard to cast. I mean, it is 3 different colors. Of course, that's going to be a little more challenging than if it was 2 colors. But yeah, it's in green. Green has color fixing, so there's ways to get it out there. Little fragile is a 1/1. However, 2 of the colors that have some of the best removal can't touch the thing. At least not directly. You're looking at white and black. It's safe from those colors for the most part. Remember, if something doesn't target it, like a board sweep, like a Chroma's Vengeance, well, then it still goes white. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about like Swords to Plowshares, stuff like that. Now, whenever you cast a creature spell, you get a +1/+1 counter on it, and that can grow relatively quick as time goes on, but also your creature spells cost 1 less to cast once you start getting counters on it for each counter. So this is another way to maybe cheat in some larger creatures a little bit ahead of curve, which is kind of awesome. And this thing itself just grows, and if your opponent's playing like white or black as one of their main colors, or if they're playing a white-black deck, they're going to have to think about a serious sideboard plan to get rid of this. So this thing is going to be awesome for you. First time in foil, too, for you Commander fans out there, which is very notable. I'm sure those foils are going to be highly sought after. All right, with that being said, those are our cards for today, and that concludes part 2. Tomorrow we'll be back with part 3. We're going to look at all of the cards in black, and we're going to keep moving through the color pie. So until next time, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.